What's up, y'all? Steven here, aka Bike Bonk Biff. The new Zwift Racing series is upon us. Makuri May. I've created a guide going over each stage and the power-ups, so let's take a look. Week 1, we have bridges and boardwalks. It's about 13 miles total, 630 feet of climbing, and it's a little boring. It's 3 laps of the same thing with really only one point where it gets exciting, and it's this Festival Harbor climb. It's about 1.2 miles, the average gradient 2.6%, maxes out of 5, which means it's extremely draftable. The one thing that's tricky though is as you get to the top, right around the banner, you get to the wooden bridge. You think the climb is over, but if you look in the bottom, there's a false flat the entire time. So whatever you do, just do not give up once you peak and that little map of the elevation goes away. You gotta keep going. And when it comes to the sprint, super simple. You know, you're coming out of that gravel downhill, so things are gonna be fast. So you might not wanna push to the front right away, but it's a long, straight push, and you just gotta go for it. Stage 2 is what I think is probably going to be the most exciting stage, mostly because there's no laps. It's about 16 miles, 650 feet of climbing, and it's kind of a doozy. You know, at the beginning here, you see it's super flat, but there's this one part where there's a kick. You know, I guess if you really look, there's 2, but this first one is the one that you have to worry about, because once you get past it, there's a nice downhill that'll carry you over the second. And for the arcade, you know, maybe it's me just being paranoid, but I feel like there's always attacks in here. Just all the turning makes people a little delirious, so push hard in the corners. Same thing kind of for the tunnel. You get this gravel portion, but when you go to tarmac to tunnel, you don't have to worry too much. And then really this first test here is going to be the harbor climb. I think this is where the front group will probably split from the main pack. I know the last race that I just did is just kind of brutal. You know, that this whole middle section, not super steep, around 4.6% at the steepest point, but a mile and a quarter long. You know, you want to make sure that you're pushing to stay with the front, because as you get towards the end, it's definitely draftable. And then just when you want to rest, there's this little punch at the mangrove maze. Again, you're going gravel to tarmac, so that's going to help you when you get to the top. But as you get through, it does turn to gravel again, so just be careful. The last thing you want to do is get dropped here after putting in hard work at the climb before. And then finally, the cavern climb, about 1.3 miles long, average gradient of only 3%. So again, something that you can certainly draft. And I would say definitely be confident here, because if you're with the front group, that means you can still hang on these climbs you just did about 3 miles ago. So don't be afraid to push. Don't be afraid to attack if you really want to. Just know that people are going to be able to draft behind you. Especially since the steepest part of this climb is at the beginning when you have that draft carrying you forwards. So be confident. And the sprint, honestly, nothing special. There's a little bit of a downhill, so just keep that in mind. Draft is going to be enhanced. Don't attack too early. Stage 3, castle to castle, about 14.4 miles, around 500 feet of climbing. Again, just a single lap, so you only have one shot at all these segments. Things start off kind of boring. I mean, I could see an attack going through the tunnel. I swear to God, every time we're in these tunnels, people go crazy. So just be aware. But this time we're going to go right at the gravel path. Now this time's kind of interesting. You think it's long enough for its own segment on Strava, but there is none. But what there is a power-up at the very beginning. So if you are starting to get gaps, don't be afraid to pop this pretty early on. You know, the steepest portion's right in the middle here. After that, it definitely levels out. I'd say kind of an average of around 3-4%. So something you can certainly draft. And the top is pancake flat and goes into that downhill. One thing to worry about though, you see on the downhill, there's a little flat section. So if things are a little bit spicy, which could be, this is kind of the one part of the race that's exciting, just don't get dropped at this point because you're trying to recover. And again, my favorite spot, I'm telling you, it's a little bit riskier at the tunnel here because you're going from gravel to tarmac. That means if there's a gap on the gravel, when you get to that tarmac, it's only going to push things out. So really make sure you're at the front here because this is the worst spot for your race to end. Right in the middle here, one of the really only exciting spots is right before this first sprint. It's a little bit of a false flat. If you look closely, you can see it's about a 1% into a 3 or 4% grade. So I could see somebody that likes to have that long distance attack go here. When you're in this castle, it's the same thing as the arcades. There's a lot of corners. Make sure to put some extra watts in there. And then just like these other ones, the sprint pancake flat. Make sure you don't stick your nose out too early if you don't have to. Otherwise, people will draft right past you. And last but not least, we've got the 3 village loop. This one you've got 2 laps. It's got one little punch in there, 630 feet of climbing, around 15 miles. This time we're going to come up the opposite end of the village. You can see it's a little bit steeper than the way that we came before, but as a whole, you get through this first little section that's a bit steeper, and it's kind of strange because right in the middle here there's a very flat portion, so don't be afraid to push a little bit harder early on to make sure that you get to this point where you can have a nice break to recover a little bit. And quite frankly, it's almost like a minute of rest. So definitely if you want to attack, you can. Just make sure that you're willing to put in the extra watts because people are going to be able to group up behind you. And then don't be thrown off by the elevation gain. You know, it's going to pretend that you're going left and that has a huge elevation gain, but no, you're going to go right. Things are going to be draftable. And then once you get to the top, it's not as flat as stage 3. There's a very small kick. I would be pretty surprised if anybody went here because there's that downhill gradient where people can draft. And then about a mile before the end is when you go through this second village. I think there's going to be so much momentum here that it doesn't even matter that there's a little kick. And let me tell you, this sprint's going to be fast. It's downhill. And then really quickly, I just wanted to throw up on screen the different power-ups you get by stage. Something important to know before you go in. I'm sure that was more than enough information to get you stoked on this new series of races. If there's anything that you would like to see changed in the future, drop it in the comments. Otherwise, if you like this sort of thing, please consider liking the video and subscribing. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.